joint board meeting. And first, I'd like to ask the Downtown Development Corporation members to introduce themselves, starting my far right.
Frank Johnson.
Jennifer Harrison-Wood.
John Lodovico.
Kelly Maher. Barbara Fontaine.
And now, if the council could introduce themselves, starting my far right.
Henry Martin. Calvin Brown.
Rich Weisenkowski.
Eric Carlson.
Mary Fortier.
Councilwoman Zapowitz is at a meeting. She will be here shortly. And I am Mayor Ken Kake. I want to first welcome Don Monte, Ryan Porter, and the Renaissance Bristol team. Thank you for joining us tonight. I also want to welcome Mike Gorman, Rob Relson, Don Poland from Gorman, New York. The purpose of tonight's meeting is to allow Renaissance Downtown at Bristol an opportunity to bring us up to date and respond to Gorman, New York report, which was presented August 18th. We also want to allow for public input on Renaissance Plan and Gorman, New York report, including questions to Renaissance and Gorman, New York. Please be patient and respectful tonight. This is a very important opportunity for all of us to learn more about the future of Depot Square. Before we begin, I'd like to recognize Jennifer Zimowitz. I call it by her maiden name, but it's easier. Chairwoman of the Bristol Development Corporation, to make remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I imagine that the largest looming question that's going to come out after tonight is, where do we go from here? So I want to take a minute and just remind everybody where we've been, and then let everybody know where we intend to go after this evening. First and foremost, the BDDC did not exist as an entity at the time that the mall property was purchased by the city. The BDDC was created by the Storts Administration to oversee the development of the downtown. The Storts Administration enacted bylaws and a charter which govern our process and procedure and by which we conduct ourselves. We are a board composed of volunteers. We're citizens, no different than every one of you that's sitting in this room. And we have basically donated our time as volunteers because we care about what happens to downtown. We live here, we raise our children here, we want them to want to live in Bristol and raise their families here. And that's why we sit up here and we do what we do. The first thing that the board did after it was convened is we embarked on a listening tour. Many of you may remember, we visited the high school, we visited a couple of elementary schools, we visited the library, we had a meeting here at City Hall, we went to the senior center. We staggered our meeting times. We met on Saturday morning, we met evenings, we met during the day, and the whole purpose of the listening tour was to hear from the public as to what they wanted downtown. We had folks that came in with great ideas. We had one lady that came in literally with a napkin on which she had drawn a picture of what her vision was for downtown. We collected all of this information and we used it to form the basis of an RFP that we put out looking for a developer to come and develop the downtown the way we heard that the citizens of Bristol wanted it. After we issued the RFP, we selected a developer, Renaissance Downtown. After we selected the developer, we then embarked with the developer on another listening tour. We visited many of those same places, again staggering times to make sure that everyone had an opportunity to attend, had the developer listen to what people wanted downtown. And then we also simultaneously negotiated what is known as the Preferred Developer Agreement. That agreement is a contract. It governs our relationship with the developer. It governs the process and the procedure by which we have to do things. We see lots of calls in the newspaper for, well, the BDDC should do this or the BDDC should do that. We are obligated to adhere to the terms of the contract we've negotiated and the bylaws and the charter which govern our operation. The developer presented a concept plan that we then embarked on our third listening tour, and we showed to the citizens of Bristol what the developer was proposing. Again, we listened to comments, we asked for tweaks, we asked for changes, until we got a final concept plan that we all agreed on, and that final concept plan was approved by both the BDDC and the City Council. The developer then went off to execute on that plan, including obtaining financing. Early this year, we learned that the developer was not able to obtain the financing necessary to execute on that plan. We had several options. We were sufficiently in advance of the deadline that we thought what was best was to have the developer propose something that could be financed. And the first plan that was submitted was what you all know and have heard us refer to as Building A, which is an approximately 100-unit apartment building with very limited single retail space on the first floor, and which the developer has suggested that the city make a $6 million investment or contribution to the construction of that building. We didn't want to just accept that. We didn't want to just reject that and go back to the drawing board. So what the BDDC has done is engage in some back and forth with the developer. Again, we've asked for tweaks, we've asked for alternatives, and we asked them to come up with a different plan. We wanted a plan that included the mixed-use residential and retail. We wanted a plan that included the piazza. We did hold a public hearing on the Building A proposal. In this room, many of you that are here now came and spoke to us about your opinions as to whether or not we should move forward with that plan. But simultaneously, we asked for a second plan. Renaissance, at our last meeting on August 18th, I believe, did submit a second plan, what is now known as the Building B plan. The Building B plan does include the mixed-use building, retail, residential, and also includes the piazza. There is a request for a $12 million contribution by the city to that plan. We had planned a public hearing, which you're actually all now sitting at, to take comments on that Building B plan. After we, again, listen to the public and what they think about the Building A plan, the Building B plan, and the contract in general, the BDDC will have a meeting where we will discuss and then make a recommendation to the council. The recommendation to the council can be proceed with Building A and give them $6 million. It can be proceed with Building A and give them something less. It can be proceed with Building A and give them nothing. It can be proceed with Building B and give them $12 million. It can be proceed with Building B and give them something less. It can be proceed with Building B and give them nothing. It can be extend the contract and send them back to the drawing board and start over. It can be terminate the contract. We don't know what that recommendation is going to be yet. We haven't met and held those discussions because we are embarking once again on the public listening tour to take the input of the public into consideration. So I ask, as the mayor asked, that when you get up to speak, you be respectful, that you tell us what you think about Building A, about Building B, about the Goman and York report, about what you're going to hear from Renaissance Downtown tonight. Continue to participate. Please attend our next meeting. And we do intend to move forward with the plan that has been laid out and the contract that we executed with the developer until the final resolution, whatever that resolution is. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Just for the record, let me state that BDDC member Mr. Barnes, Tom Barnes, is also with us. Now let me start the meeting by recognizing Mr. Don Monti and his team for their presentation.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor, Chairperson, and members of the council and the board. And I'm pleased to be here tonight. The gentleman on my left obviously is no stranger to you all. He's been a fixture here for the last probably 4 years. And I think it would be appropriate for all of his hard work and efforts and adopted by many families here in Bristol, so he has many last names. But I think it would be appropriate for Ryan to be the one to present not only the Plan A, Building Plan A and Building Plan B, but also to be able to comment on the recent report that was prepared, which certainly has an impact on what Renaissance has done, has an impact on what you as the BDDC and the City Council will determine. And without further ado, Ryan.
Okay, thanks, Don. I also want to obviously recognize my local team here, Charlie and Mark. Everybody here knows Charlie and Mark. They have obviously dedicated their years to this project as well, and Jess, who used to work with us but is here tonight to support. I want to thank you, Mayor, for having us here this evening, and the Council and BDDC for your partnerships over the past 4 years. And obviously I want to thank the community for coming out this evening, as well as last but certainly not least, the Bristol Rising crowd that I know is here this evening and has been supportive of this process and provided input and been part of every little nuance of this over the last 4 years. You know, it takes a lot to dedicate your personal time, as BDC board members and council members and the community knows. your personal time to really engage yourself in a process like this, learn about it, discover the facts, and be part of what we see as a great opportunity for revitalization. So tonight what I'm going to talk about is I'm going to talk about, it's kind of a hodgepodge presentation. It's going to discuss our Building A submission, as the chairwoman stated. It's going to discuss our Building B submission, which was just this past month. It's also going to talk, obviously, about our response to the Goldman and York report. Obviously, we have some disagreements with the report. We obviously respect Goldman and York as a firm for their experience, but we believe that there are some inaccuracies that we're going to be discussing tonight, and we're happy to spend time afterwards speaking with you folks further about this. So without further ado, I want to start by reminding folks of some of the major accomplishments. The chairwoman mentioned some of them. Obviously, we were selected as the preferred developer back in May of 2010 to partner with the city and the community and the BDDC. We opened our informational office in June, which we hired local staff, started our website, started the crowdsourcing effort, which is the first crowdsourced placemaking process in the history of this country, started here in Bristol, Connecticut. It's something that has been mentioned and seen in articles all as far as Australia, all over the country. It's something that's been emulated in communities. It's something that we utilize throughout our development efforts across the Northeast. And it was born here. In October of 2011, through working with the BDDC and the city and the Bristol Rising Crowd, we were able to submit our concept master plan for the entire downtown. It was a long effort. It took us about a year to put that together, and working in concert with all the parties. We were very proud of that vision that was going to build upon the plan of conservation and development, build upon the zone changes that have occurred here that encouraged mixed-use development in downtown, and we were able to bring that concept plan forward, and as was mentioned, that was approved unanimously by both the BDDC and the council at the time. In 2012, we had a couple of things. We had our UDDP zoning amendments, so there were a couple of tweaks that we did recognize through the concept plan adoption that needed to be brought forth to the zoning code to allow for the creation of a unified downtown development special permit, which we subsequently received, obviously, for the site. There was a grand opening of the new grocer downtown in February of 2013 after those zoning amendments were approved and we got our special permit for the entire site and the entire site's development. We were able to move forward with site plan approval, so technical engineering for the initial phase of what was then envisioned to be a 5-phase project that included a mix of residential, retail, commercial, and hotel space. And this first phase was pegged to be about 240 units and 20,000 feet of retail space, approximately, about 22,000 actually, and a piazza, public piazza. It included 2 buildings. One building, which everybody refers to as Building A, which is a 100-unit straight residential building, and Building B, which is 140 units, over about 20,000 square feet of retail space. In August to October of 2013, one of the huge pieces of this, actually a linchpin to this entire process, was the relocation of the existing McDonald's from the lower portion of the site to the upper portion of the site. Actually, that process led to the site changing its configuration. We ended up with just about over 15 acres for development, so everybody keeps referring to it as a 17-acre site still since then, but it's really only 15 and change. That's kind of a process that we had to go through because the McDonald's had a large easement over the entire bottom half of the property and would have precluded any development from occurring. So it was a really, believe it or not, a very heavy lift. Negotiating with corporate McDonald's, that 10,000-pound gorilla. We worked really hard with the city, and I want to commend the city's attorneys for working so hard on that and every other process with us throughout this. In January of 2012 and September of 2013, we went through a housing survey process, which backed up our Zimmerman-Volk analysis. And then, obviously over the years, Bristol Rising has accomplished some amazing things, which I'll just touch upon tonight, because we don't want to be here all night, but between their efforts for community events, for supporting local entrepreneurs. Businesses have opened, people have gotten excited, amazing things have happened, friendships have been created, family has been created. It's really been an unbelievable experience. And then obviously just overall economic development and new businesses and vibrancy that have come to Bristol have been an amazing accomplishment thus far in the public-private partnership. I do want to touch specifically upon some of the businesses that have opened and are inspired to open through the crowdsourcing process. Obviously, the folks from Bare Bones and their efforts to really encourage people to start investing in retail space downtown, they did an amazing job. They sought out to rent a retail space in concert with Bristol Rising, working with them and us and the city to really attract new retailers, and now that's where the Barley Vine sits today. So if it wasn't for the Bare Bones folks, who knows where the Barley Vine would have been attracted. And then obviously Bristol Billiards, Barley Vine, who has invested a lot of their life and their savings, live right up the street into what I consider one of the top places in Bristol to now dine and get together with friends and family. The People's Marketplace, Firefly Brewing Company, who came from East Hartford and really kind of saw Bristol as a great opportunity. The Artistry Tea House, the rebranding of the former Tortoise and the Hare into 457 Mason Jar, all amazing things that have come through our collaboration and through the efforts of the Bristol Rising crowd. I want to touch upon, and throughout this presentation, I'm going to touch upon kind of responses to the Going to New York efforts. The Going to New York folks in their study mentioned basically three main things that they had analyzed when going through the past efforts. The response to the RFQ that we had submitted back in 2009-2010, before we were actually selected, before a lot of the planning went down, and that we worked on. The preferred development agreement that was mentioned earlier, that is our actual contractual agreement with the city, and the Depot Square Phase 1 financial proposal, which was basically the Building A proposal that we submitted to the city earlier this year. There are a host of things, and I know Going to New York had a limited amount of time and opportunity to really look at what we had done over 4 years, but there are a host of very important things that were not mentioned throughout the report that we think it was a mistake to overlook those efforts. One being the North Star report. North Star is a company, a world-renowned, nationally renowned branding company that was actually hired by the city earlier, late in 2013, mid-2013, and spent a significant amount of time with the city, our team, with the entire Bristol community, coming up with a branding strategy for for Bristol overall. They came up with a branding strategy. That branding strategy was finalized, the All Hard strategy, and the city is moving forward with that branding. And I think one thing that was definitely missed in what perceived to be Going to New York's non-review of that study is that they focus really on creating this downtown and having this mixed-use great environment here to really attract people, to make them feel proud of this community even more so than they already are, because we know that Bristol is a very, very proud community, and there is a lot of heart here that I've been honored to experience. The concept master plan. So this was the outline of a master plan that was created in 2011 for the entire downtown area. It didn't just include the Depot Square site. It really touched upon sites that surround the Depot Square property, because we believe very strongly that you do need to look comprehensively. We've said that for 4 years. You have to think right outside the boundaries of the property in particular. People always come up to me and they say, well, you're never going to be able to build anything there if you don't improve this area. Well, absolutely. We believe very strongly that if you look comprehensively, things can really happen. We've seen dramatic improvements in the Summer Street area. We've seen dramatic improvements in the West End. And that's all from this comprehensive effort that started with the master plan. So I believe there was mention in the Going to New York report about the placemaking and looking at repurposing buildings outside of the site and trying to work from the outside in. Well, we've been doing that and successfully as a partnership, the community and the city and Renaissance, for quite some time now. The Zimmerman Volk residential analysis. This was part of the concept master plan. I'm going to talk a little bit more about ZVA and their experience, but they are one of the top residential analysts in the country. They are considered the tops for this type of development in particular, and they have been part of this process for 4 years. Recently did their residential analyst update again, in 2013, and really feel very strongly that there is a successful opportunity here in Bristol for bringing new residential product in a mixed-use environment to the downtown. The Clue Group, which is, again, one of the top retail and revitalization analyst firms in the country. Kennedy Smith and her team are renowned throughout the country. She was one of the founding members of the National Main Street Organization and Trust, and has been working on this project with us for 4 years. These folks have also, provided a response to the Goldman in New York study, which we'll talk about later. A supplemental submission to the concept plan. This was an important piece. This is, building upon what the chairwoman said, that the concept plan was submitted. There was changes that were requested. We made certain changes to the concept plan report and, moved the process forward from there. The Housing 400 survey and all the Bristol Rising efforts. So I saw little to zero mention of Bristol Rising in the Goldman in New York report. Bristol Rising, again, like I said, is a crowdsourced placemaking process that is known and renowned across the country. It has been extremely influential to the success of our efforts thus far. It is what has been part of shaping this project and this plan, and the fact that it wasn't really given its due and looked at. In particular, I was fairly taken back by that. The special permit for the Unified Downtown Development Project. This was our special permit that was adopted by the city as part of the zoning changes that occurred, and I didn't really see any mention of that within the Goldman New York study. The Depot Square Phase 1 site plan, the site plan itself, the efforts that went through with that, the engineering that went into that. There was no real analysis or look at that as to how that relates to placemaking for the downtown area. And there were a host of other things, such as our supplemental submission to the Building A proposal, which came, and I can't blame Goldman in New York because it came about the same time that they finished their study, but the Building B proposal, which is obviously another important thing that should go into any decision making, because that's one of the options that we were asked to provide in concert with working with the BDDC over the past 6 to 9 months. So these are a host of things that we feel have shaped this process that we didn't really see addressed throughout their study. I want to talk a little bit about the branding of Bristol. I want to talk a little bit more about the fact that in North Star is a firm that we believe very strongly in. We contributed actually as one of the private entities towards the $30,000 of the private money that went towards that study, because we believed very strongly it was the right choice to go down a branding path. We dedicated tons of time and effort in working with the city and the BDDC and the community to bring forth that branding effort. And again, these are very well-renowned folks in branding municipalities. And one thing that's highlighted within their study is that when they met with people over 6, 9, 12 months and talked to folks and learned about folks that commuted actually to Bristol for work every day, they learned that their preferences were not to live where they worked here, because here didn't provide that living environment, and that they were looking for the opportunity to have that live, work, shop, and play environment here in downtown Bristol, here in this area, with newer, more appropriate housing, and that was not available to them. So that really spoke volumes to us about their outreach, really dovetailing all the outreach and the efforts and the feedback that we had been getting for years. They're quoted as saying downtown redevelopment is key, and that once the downtown is developed, young professionals and families can work and live there in a style many are interested in. So this is a very important study that, again, we didn't really see referenced. I want to talk a little bit about the rents now and have some discussion about the rents, because a large portion of the Goldman in New York study is dedicated to questioning the rents that we have projected in our financial underwriting. Back in 2010, when we first got to town, we looked at some product in the area. We kind of thought, well, what's an initial estimate? Just utilizing the existing comp product in the area, that if you built something kind of B product, what do you think you could get? We were in kind of that $1.40 range. We knew we had to be higher than that, so we embarked upon an effort to learn more, do more surveys, engage ZVA on a more regular basis. We worked very hard, obviously, on that concept plan, because whenever you look to finance and develop a project, there are two things that lenders are going to look for. Obviously, the risk and returns that are involved, and then the process, where you are in the process. So we felt it was very important for us to continue to push forward to get approvals while really working with the financing community and with the top analysts in the country to figure out where we thought we could land from a rental perspective. Bristol Rising took shape again, and we started thinking, okay, well, let's start serving folks. Let's start taking the temperature of folks as to what they really think they can afford. We started with the Bristol BR housing survey, the 400 list, that we would look to embark and get 400 people to like new housing in the area. And our mission was then to take that list of 400 and start narrowing it down and talking about prices. When we did these surveys, we actually started by surveying these folks at approximately a $2 per square foot per month rental rate. So that's where we started, and we felt that if we got to around a 220 rate, we'd be in a position where we were close to being able to conventionally finance this project. So at this point, we started surveying folks around $2. We felt, okay, well, $1.60, maybe that makes sense. And then we said, no, we could definitely work a little bit higher. Again, we started getting feedback through the 400 campaign, and then we started asking folks to sign letters of interest. So we actually asked them to sign up for a priority list to get on the list. We showed them pictures, we showed them imagery of what a unit could look like to get on the list for living downtown. Once we got phase 1 approved, we then re-engaged ZVA, and we started looking specifically, okay, we're at the point where we have phase 1 approval. We need to get very serious about what the underwriting looks like in this project. And fortunately, but unfortunately, we were a lot higher than our early thoughts on building on B product, and we knew we were going to be building A product here, granite countertops, in-unit washer dryers, very nice development. We landed at about $1.85. This was obviously a lot better than the $1.40 number, but unfortunately it was short of that $2 to $2.20 number. So folks kind of look at me sometimes in the community and they say, well, why didn't you ask us for help back in 2010? And I said, well, we had thought we could achieve 2 to 220 rents in this community eventually if we worked hard and we really surveyed and we really made sure that we knew our market very, very well. If we ended up at 220, we didn't need any help. And once we discovered immediately that we weren't going to get there, that's when we started collaborating with the city and the BDC, that we really weren't going to achieve the rents that were necessary to get us to where we need to get to. But that being said, we continue to get LOIs. We continue to talk to folks about, okay, it's not $2.20, it's not $2 rents. What do you think about $1.85 rents? We're currently up to 197 letters of interest, many of which are outside of this community. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about drive times, etc., but I want you to recognize that out of the 197 LOIs, about 36 to 40% of those LOIs were signed by folks that don't even live in Bristol. So they either live in surrounding communities, or some of them live out of state that used to live in Bristol and have been engaged in this process for quite some time. But it's really important to recognize that it's not all Bristol folks that have been part of this process. They have a stake, obviously, in Bristol, but not all living here today. So then, in response to the survey, when we had submitted our Building A package, which was to look at the 100-unit building, the BDC, as the chairwoman mentioned, and we sat down over a 4 or 5 month period at the beginning of the year into the middle of the year, and they asked us to really kind of go out there and resurvey the folks, to say to the folks, okay, you just submitted something that would require municipal assistance, municipal financing, or some sort of help to get the project going. Are people still interested, even though that's on the table? So we went out there and went to the 197 list, and we started resurveying them and taking a sample space of those folks to make sure that they were still interested in this product, to make sure that even if we just built the Building A first and then it was followed by Building B, that they would come downtown. And not surprisingly, 80% of those folks, because of the lack of product that exists in the area, were very, very favorable still to moving downtown, even at around those $1.85 rents. And the 4% or so that cited cost as a concern was obviously something that we were happy as a result, because it's a very small amount of the sample space. So ultimately, again, we had to look to achieve 2 to 220 rents. We felt that 2 to 220 rents per square foot could actually, on the residential side, support even $12 to $14 under market for new construction retail rents. So if we could have gotten there, we would have been very confident in building all 240 units, the piazza and the retail space below. But unfortunately, like I said, we fell that 15 to 35 cents short on the rents per month per unit. And just to give you a comparable, in Blueback right now, rents range for the rentals that they have there to between $2.80 and $3.24 per square foot. So while we recognize the demographics are different, you can see that, you know, thinking we were going to get to the 2 to 220 range only 15 miles away was not a crazy thing to think at the time. So that kind of gives you a little bit of story of how we landed at $1.85. It was a combination of research. It was a combination of live surveys that were done over and over again. And most importantly, it was a study performed by Zimmerman Volk Associates, who is, again, recognized as a national leader and national expert in residential feasibility. They've been working on residential analysis since 1988. They've done over 450 studies throughout this country. 60 of them were specifically to downtowns, many of which are similar to this suburban downtown market. And they use a proprietary methodology. They don't use your typical comp methodology that a lot of firms use, and that's why they're renowned for what they do and why they're so successful in predicting rents, because they have their own proprietary target market methodology. We provided Zimmerman Volk the Goldman in New York study. We asked them to kind of review it, respond to it, and I will tell you that their response was not very favorable to the study. They felt that the fact that the Goldman in New York folks focused on 2 and 4 minute drive times as a trade area was utterly ridiculous, is really the comments that they gave us. They felt that any conventional market analyst would know that you have to look outside 2 to 4 minute drive times for the market that you're trying to attract for new residential. And in fact, they said to refer to the demand area as a trade area is not even correct nomenclature. They said for 30 years they've only heard trade area be referred to from a retail perspective, and it's usually considered draw area when you're talking about residential. So they were taken back by the study. Kennedy Smith from the Klubu, who again is involved in these revitalization projects, made comments that the average Bristol person commutes 23 miles to and from work. So to expect that you could only look within a 23 minutes, that you could only look within a 2 minute drive time is fairly ridiculous. Zimmerman feels actually very strongly that the entire Hartford County is a draw area. Obviously you have competition, but if you look through their analysis, they whittle that down from, what's the migration patterns, who's moving at the time, who do you think you can attract, who do you think you can capture, and they basically whittle down to a capture number and a capture rate from a demographic perspective that leads you to how much can people pay and how quickly could you absorb these units, which speaks to the vacancy rate, which they also disagreed with the Goldman in New York comments on, and they felt it was very reasonable to assume that we could reach stabilization in the time frames that we had estimated in our underwriting. So I do want to talk a little bit more about the rents, because we were actually a little surprised also as to the straight misquoting of the rents that were in the Goldman in New York study. The Goldman in New York study, I'm not sure where these numbers came from, referred to studio numbers at $1,100 and 1-bedroom units at $1,500. where in fact, if they had done a little bit more research, they would have discovered that we were actually estimating our student studio units to be between $750 and $950, and it was our one-bedroom units that were in the $1,000 to $1,200 range. So maybe they screwed up the units types with the rents, but I'm not sure what happened there. And there was really no mention whatsoever in the study about the two-bedroom unit typology, which was in that $1,400 to $1,600 range. These images, amenities were all the types of things that were in our underwriting. They were things that we had brought to the community throughout the surveying process to make sure that they understood exactly what they would be getting for what they would be renting when they made commitments to the LOIs and when they worked with us on determining what the price points were. I want to remind you from a housing perspective that in January of 2010, when we first got involved in this project, ESPN was quoted for saying that them and the hospital, in quotes, could use new housing for the larger employees in Bristol. So providing that downtown housing, providing that opportunity in a mixed-use environment, in new residential product that provides all these amenities was something that back in 2010, two of your largest employers were calling for. So this is not something that just came out of the air. This is something obviously that we did a lot of research on, a lot of survey work on, and also communicated with some of the largest employers and have continued to communicate with some of the largest employers in the city. I always like to say, one of Kennedy's quotes, which is, "Retail follows rooftops." She's brought and been responsible for bringing retail space to thousands of communities throughout this country, has done it in numerous different methodologies, but she will always tell you that these things basically don't happen unless you have people living downtown, and then once you have people living downtown, you see that explosion of retail from a consumer base to allow for the expansion of retail throughout the downtown area. These businesses up here on the screen, again, one of the main reasons these businesses, and I can tell you at least 4 of them, because the Mason Jar is obviously just a rebranding, but 4 of these businesses, one of the main reasons that they are here today is because of the prospect of the future of a mixed-use downtown here in Bristol. Not just because Bristol is Bristol, but because they came in, they met with the Development Authority, they met with the city, they met with folks from BDDC, they met with Renaissance. We explained to them the future that we were bringing here, and they were willing to, like Renaissance, invest their own money in this community to try to bring this project forward and to try to be part of this process. I also want to remind folks that there are 75 amenities in downtown. We've done extensive surveys of the amenities that exist in downtown. We know that Goldman had looked at some of the amenities in the downtown area, but it almost seemed as though it was more of a Google search type thing, where we have met with every one of these businesses and spent considerable amount of time with these businesses to make sure that they understood the development that we're trying to bring forth here and be part of the process to encourage downtown development. But these businesses are businesses that we need to support. And one of the things that's missing here is new market rate residential to help support a lot of these businesses, such as the Barley Vine or existing businesses that have been around here for quite some time, whether it be the music shop or businesses in Mufali's Plaza or whatever it may be. There's that opportunity. And people always talk about restaurants. There are 45 of the 75 are restaurant or food oriented. So we really have to look at supporting some of these businesses that exist here and how we can build a market to support those businesses. I know we had the Taste of Bristol just this past weekend, and unfortunately the rain caught it a little short, but I heard it was an amazing turnout. Mark's quote to me was, we were turning over people left and right until the rain started coming, but that's just an indication of the fact that A, there are businesses down here to support, and B, there's a desire to have this type of environment. But what is missing? Again, people living in the downtown area. I want to talk quickly about the plan itself, because there has been a lot of misconception out in the community over the past 6, 9, 12 months about the plan changing. As soon as we started talking about financing being a challenge. There was a lot of folks saying, well, you know, they produced a plan back in 2011 and it's a different plan. Well, it is not a different plan. It is the same plan. We've always been working under the exact same plan. The original phase 1 was going to again include the straight residential building and the mixed-use building along Main Street with the piazza. But what we're talking about right now is not changing the plan. We're talking about changing the phasing of the plan. So what building gets first and how it gets built first that's the discussion that we're having right now. How do we finance it and how do we bring it forward is the discussion, not changing the plan from what it was in the past. We've had amazing planning expertise to be part of this process. I know Goldman has a gentleman named Patrick Pinnell that works with them, who we've had a lot of experience with in the past, and you know, highly respect Patrick. We actually talked to him about a bunch of different projects throughout Connecticut several years ago. But we had on our team, led by Town Planning Partnership, Mark Evans, from the principal from Town Planning, is here with us this evening. And Mark has been involved in this project for 4 years. Mark will talk a little bit more about his experience a little bit later on, but has an amazing resume as far as town planning goes. Clough Harbor and Associates, which is the planning and engineering firm that did all of our engineering work, has been part of this project for 3+ years. Urban Design Associates, UDA, one of the top planning and urban design firms in the entire country, out of Pittsburgh, worked on this project for 2 years. There was a mention in the Goldman and York study about, several mentions obviously, about placemaking. I'll talk a little bit more about that. But one of the interesting pieces of that is that Goldman and York actually made a reference to us potentially bringing in Project for Public Spaces for this project. And oddly enough, we brought Project for Public Spaces in, I believe, in 2011, 2012 timeframe, and they spent 6 months working with the community and working with us and the city on this project and talking about placemaking. And in our response to the report, which we'll be handing out after this, you will see Ethan Kent, one of the principals at Project for Public Spaces, talk about this project and how he believes it should move forward. But he believes, just like many of us, that the representations in the GNY report as to placemaking are quite unfounded, considering that we believe, and many believe, that this was probably the most comprehensive, in my opinion, placemaking effort in the country. Through the crowdsourcing effort, through all the efforts that we brought in with all our consultants, we really did take every effort possible to go through in a really comprehensive placemaking process. You know, there's references in the back of the GNY report to parks throughout the country, one being Bryant Park. It's a bit interesting to me that they would mention Bryant Park, as Bryant Park is obviously in New York City and is surrounded by millions of square feet of development and has an enormous cost to it. You know, so we took very seriously placemaking. The plan has created many public spaces, obviously, in addition to the piazza, pocket parks, linear parks, green spaces. These are all types of things that have to be properly sized and have to be economically supported. So to just say, let's build a park or let's build a piazza, you're talking about investing tons of taxpayer money to build something and tons of taxpayer money to maintain it every year, and it is not economically viable. And experts all over the country for 50 years will tell you that that is not the right process to go through, and that when you build a park or a piazza or these types of things, the economically sound thing to do is to surround that park or that place, that public space, with active environment, to surround it with mixed-use buildings so that people, A, utilize it, and B, can help support it from an income perspective. It's very difficult to say that you can just simply build a public space and that's going to be the solution to your problems and people will come. And again, remember that map I showed you with the businesses that have come. I would bet that you could ask every one of those businesses and they didn't come to downtown Bristol because of the prospect of building a park or a hill or whatever they referenced in the study. Again, Town Planning Partnership had many of these comments. They talked considerably about how they were part of the process of working on improvements to the West End and Summer Street, and how there was references in the GNY report that, you know, we really didn't look outside the site. Well, we've had a lot of successes outside the site, and I think there's actually some folks here tonight that will speak to that. Again, the placemaking piece of this, you know, again, Mark and his team, in concert with the folks from PPS, have really honed in on the fact that it really needs to be in scale, and that the parks that were referenced were way out of scale and were fairly fiscally imprudent for the city of Bristol to look to take hold of. And in addition to that, one of the things that was identified in the branding study done by North Star, and also has been identified by our team, is the expansive park system that exists here in Bristol. It's one thing that people are very proud of. It's one thing that we believe very strongly should be supported. But right now there's over 21 acres, or approximately 21 acres of parkland already within walking distance of the Depot Square site downtown. So there's that huge opportunity that exists here today to build upon. And the way to get folks to utilize that park is to really create a destination, a place where not only people want to come to visit, but people want to live, work, shop, and play. So that brings us to today and the financing options, and I want to talk quickly about the financing options that we explored and some next steps that we're talking about. The options that we've explored in the past 9 to 12 months, 9 months since the beginning of this year, basically. Obviously, we're conventional financing. We quickly discovered that under those rent parameters, both whether you include retail or you don't, we could not achieve conventional financing because it would not meet the criteria. I do want to make a statement that that does not mean there's not private investment here or private confidence here. So there's been statements such as the private community obviously doesn't want to invest in this, so why should we? Well, that's not true, because every financing proposal that we've put forth includes a very considerable private investment. Okay, so it's a combination that we're talking about. So the way these things work is that if you can't reach your return parameters, okay, for your investment, then you need help to make your returns a little bit better. It does not mean you're not confident in the project. It does not mean you won't invest in Bristol. It simply means that you need assistance from a financing standpoint. So conventional financing didn't work. We looked at something called EB-5 financing, which is done through the Department of Immigration. It's a foreign investment program. We looked at CHAMP grants, which is state grant financing. We looked at bonding through tax increment financing and general obligation bonding. We've started having conversations, which is something that is new, that's come up recently, which I'm excited to talk to the BDDC and the city about union partnerships from the trades perspective for financing, and the opportunities that come with that for trades to potentially, A, build this project and invest in the project at the same time, because their pension funds obviously sometimes require lower return rates than your typical private equity would. I want to talk a little bit about the financing process that we went through. So Q4 2013 and Q1 2014, over those months, we spent a lot of time meeting as a public-private partnership once we realized that we needed to go down an unconventional financing path. By Q1, the end of Q1, after discussions with the city parties, it was determined that the city asked us to explore the municipal financing path. So out of all those financing options that I just had on the board, we had discussions about each one of them, and we basically concluded, let's look at what municipal financing would look like. So Renaissance spent some time between then and Q2 2014 underwriting a proposal for municipal financing, and we submitted one for Building A only in the second quarter, and then we were asked to again collaborate with the BDDC. We sat down for months working together, looking at the Building A package. They asked a lot of tough questions. We provided a lot of answers. We went through that package over and over again. We talked about all the iterations. Goldman mentioned in their report talking about sensitivity analysis and vacancy sensitivity and rent sensitivities. We talked about all those items. We looked at different models. We really explored the Building A package to its fullest extent and answered all the questions that were there. And then we were asked to look at Building B, as the chairwoman mentioned. So we spent the next couple of months We originally had anticipated having 90 days to do it, but with the potential of the referendum and the timing that had to go forth with that, we were squeezed down to about 60 days. But we worked very diligently to come up with a Building B proposal. Not as robust as the Building A proposal, but we were able to submit something in this past August for Building B, which again looked at that municipal financing option for Building B. So we really followed a roadmap, as the chairwoman mentioned, that had been set in stone back in 2010 and continue to follow that. Obviously, we would all like this process to move a lot faster, but these things are challenges. And as long as we all keep our head moving forward and roll our sleeves up and work together, we're confident that we're going to be able to get there. And then again in August of this year, the Goldman and York proposal and a report came to light, which obviously we weren't a part of for very good reason. And I do want to make sure that everybody understands that we commend the mayor and the city for going down the path of looking for outside expertise and input on this process. These are very tough decisions. It's very important to make sure you do your due diligence, and we wholeheartedly support that approach. The problem is the results, and we didn't really support the results. So the Phase 1 proposal, 1A proposal, which is the Building A building, would again be that residential building with retail on that one frontage area of Main Street. Would provide segregated parking behind. We had proposed taking the existing green space at the corner of Main Street and Riverside Avenue and improving that into a temporary piazza. So taking that green space, putting some money into it, working it into basically an event space, maybe adding a stage or a pavilion, really connecting that to the transit opportunities as a starting point for us to build momentum, retaining the parking that exists right now for the retailers on Main Street so that there could be a transition of that time, and really bringing that process forward in concert with the city and the BDDC. Quality was very important to us. We worked very hard with some local folks on putting together a package for a proposal for Building A that we could be very proud of. It would be the nicest residential building in Bristol, in our opinion, and we feel that it would have been a great kickstart, or would be a great kickstart to this project. Seeing is obviously believing. We did some renderings of what it could look like if you had that green space and the new apartment building and you fronted Main Street and you were able to give that new 150 people the opportunity to dine across the street or hang out downtown or frequent some of the businesses in the area. The Building A financing, the capital stack, basically shook out to be about a $17.7 million project. It would have required $2.7 million in equity, a $9 million construction loan. So again, to those who questioning whether there'd be private investment, we're talking about $11.7 million in new private investment in this first building, and that gap would be about $6 million. So we were asked to again look at municipal financing and what that meant. So we worked with the city's assessor, the city's comptroller. We did analysis as to what the bonding would look like, and where it basically shook out was that we would support a portion of the debt service by paying what's called a payment in lieu of taxes. So we would pay a certain portion of the debt service, which is if you float the bond, you have to pay debt every month and every year. We would pay a portion of that every year, and then the remainder, the city would support the remainder of it. And basically where it shook out was on the $6 million issue, from a taxpayer impact standpoint, you would see an impact on a yearly basis on average over the 21 years of about $2.68 per year per taxpayer. So per taxpayer includes everybody from who pays just, automotive tax to someone who pays for a home and 4 cars and a business, right? So that's the average per taxpayer. For the average homeowner, it would be about $7.41 per year in liability. And that's kind of where the $6 million bond would shake out over time. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about the B proposal. So the B proposal was again looking at building B first, and that would include the 140 residential units, 20,000 square feet of retail space through retail on the ground floor, the public piazza. We look to create kind of a temporary pavilion right here that events could be held on, because the belief is that if we create this temporary parking lot on what would be a future development pad, we could provide more convenience-based parking now that we don't have Building A here right now, but it wouldn't preclude Building A in the future. And then again, have dedicated parking fields for the residential on the upper end of the building. So this would obviously create that kind of mixed-use feel along Main Street, on the other side of Main. Again, we're looking at a very quality building with a mix of brick and hardy plank. A really amazing opportunity to address the street and create that walkability and really front and create vibrancy on both sides of Main. The Building B financing package was about $26.5 million in construction costs. It included about $2 million in equity. It included a $12.5 million construction loan, so that would be about $14.5 million in private investment that would go into this project. And we'd be looking for help and assistance with gap financing in the range of $12 million for this project. I again ran the same scenarios in working with the comptroller and the assessor and the city, and ultimately where that shook out from the $12 million perspective was about $7.28 to the average taxpayer per year, and about $20 to the average homeowner per year, the estimates on the liability on the Building B bond that could be floated. So that kind of shows you what these types of opportunities and options look like. And obviously, we're not saying that this is the way to go. We were asked to look at this. We think it's a very viable option. But what's most important is that whichever direction the city and the community choose to go, that we continue to work towards the vision, that we continue to figure out a way, because there are other options that are on the table that we can look at. But I do want folks to consider that back in 2011, our market analysts worked very hard on what the potential long-term benefits could be on a full build-out of the entire downtown beyond the Depot Square site. And we talked about numbers as high as 2,000 construction jobs, 2,000 permanent jobs, hundreds of millions in direct income benefits for people hired or involved in the project, 17 million approximately in taxes at full build-out, $80 million in new purchasing power. So this is the long-term benefit potential that's out there for the left side, which is the short-term liability per year. So I want folks to think about it from an investment standpoint, in that if you believe that your children are going to stay in this community with a unrevitalized downtown that doesn't attract folks to stay here, do we feel it's worth making this investment? Obviously, we push very hard and feel very strongly that making investments now for the future of this community to bring back what was the heart of this downtown, what was the heart of this community, and what could continue to be the heart of this community, is a good bet to make. And that's really how we look at this project, as a collaborative effort, as an opportunity to move this forward. And that's what Renaissance is interested in, is to move this project forward. There was a question in the Goldman and York report: what is Renaissance expecting to get in return for its $2.1 million that it's invested so far? We're basically expecting zero on the first building. Zero. Zero return. So all we're looking to do is kickstart this project. We believe in Bristol. We believe in this community. We believe in this public-private partnership. We're ready to move forward together. And if it's not under this option, we'll find a way to do it. But we have to continue to work together. When folks look at this community and they say, all hard, we want to invest here, and they see dissension, they don't see us working together, they're detracted from it. They don't want to come here and invest their dollars. So we have to continue to work together in a collaborative way to make the vision a reality, which we are confident that we can do. I want to remind you of how other projects did it. Blueback Square, something that people probably in this room drive to all the time to dine and shop.